Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a warrior or a fallen angel, but with a missing book, a forbidden scripture that the Bible itself quotes, yet no longer contains. Before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far this community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Book of Jasher, a name whispered in the shadows of biblical scholarship, a title that appears in the Christian Bible not once, but twice. And yet, when you search for it inside the Bible itself, you will not find it. It's gone, removed, erased, or perhaps, hidden. Tonight, we begin by uncovering the strange tale of this missing scripture, why it vanished, who tried to suppress it, and why it contains some of the most extraordinary accounts of the ancient world. In the Book of Joshua, chapter 10, a moment unfolds so bizarre that most readers simply skip over it. Joshua commands the sun and moon to stand still in the sky, and the text pauses to ask its reader, is this not written in the Book of Jasher? It's as if the Bible itself is pointing to a companion book, a larger chronicle, a deeper source behind the story. But where is it? Why is it gone? And what else did it contain? Later, in 2 Samuel, we encounter the book again. David, mourning the death of Saul and Jonathan, quotes a haunting lamentation. And once again, the Bible states, "Behold, it is written in the Book of Jasher." These references are not minor footnotes, they are the scripture itself admitting that it once relied on another ancient source. A source that preserved details, events, and stories now lost to time. So what happened? Scholars argue, but their answers are rarely satisfying. Some say the book simply did not survive history. But ancient texts rarely vanish by accident. Others claim it was never meant for the public, a text reserved for scribes and priests. And then there are those who whisper that Jasher contains stories of angels, giants, supernatural wars, and forbidden knowledge, stories authorities didn't want circulating. But to understand the mystery, we must go backward, farther than David, farther than Moses, even farther than the flood. Because Jasher does not simply recount stories, it expands them. Details that Genesis gives only in fragments, Jasher unfolds with clarity. Events that appear vague or symbolic in the Bible become vivid, emotional, and terrifying. Our journey begins with the origins of the text itself. Jasher does not mean a person, it means the upright one or the book of the just. A title implying it was a national chronicle, a record of righteous men across generations. Some early rabbis believed it was a collection of testimonies from Adam to Joshua, preserved across centuries. Others argued it was a library, not a single scroll, a compilation of ancient records from before and after the flood. The first clue to its contents lies in the opening chapters the surviving version provides. Unlike Genesis, which begins with creation, Jasher begins with the world after the flood. It recounts how Noah and his sons emerged from the ark, and how the earth looked in those first sorrowful days. According to Jasher, the world was silent, heavy, stained by the memory of what came before. Mountains toppled, forests vanished, oceans carved new paths through the land. The survivors felt the weight of two worlds upon them, the world that died, and the world that must now begin. Jasher paints the scene vividly, describing how Noah walked the ruined earth with tears in his eyes, praying not for victory, but for forgiveness, for the world that drowned, for the sins that summoned the flood, and for whatever future lay ahead. His sons wandered in silence, each realizing that civilization itself depended on them. From their hands, the new nations would be born. But even here, even in these fragile new beginnings, mysteries linger. Jasher hints that traces of the old world remained. Fragments of pre-flood knowledge, broken tools, fallen monuments, and yes, stories of giants. Though the Nephilim were gone, their memory was not. And their legacy, according to Jasher, would continue through bloodlines that no one expected. This book does not hide from darkness. It faces it. And that's precisely why it may have vanished. Because Jasher does more than recount history, it exposes the uncomfortable truth that humanity has forgotten. It shows how nations rose not by accident, but through conflicts, revelations, and divine interventions. It describes how the world after the flood struggled to rebuild, while ancient secrets bled into new empires. But perhaps the most important reason Jasher disappeared, is because it reveals the origins of one man who would shape the destiny of all nations, Nimrod. Jasher's account of Nimrod is unlike anything in Genesis. It is deeper, richer, darker, describing the childhood of a boy who grew into the world's first king. A mighty hunter, a rebel, a conqueror, and perhaps, something more. Some traditions whisper that Nimrod was not entirely human, that his strength was beyond mortal limits, that he inherited something from before the flood. And Jasher contains that story in full. This is why tonight's journey begins with loss, not the loss of the flood, but the loss of a text. Because when a book disappears, it's rarely because it had nothing to say. More often, it's because it said too much. As we turn the pages of the Book of Jasher, chapter by chapter, we will uncover secrets that echo through Genesis, revelations about angels, giants, kings, and prophets. We will see the rise of Nimrod, the building of the Tower of Babel, the wars of ancient giants, the childhood of Abraham, the destruction of Sodom, and the fall of nations shaped by forces beyond human sight. And as we explore this missing scripture, we'll ask a single question: if the Bible itself once pointed to the Book of Jasher, why was the world told to forget it? Tonight's story begins here, in the silence after the flood, with a lost book, a vanished record, and a question that refuses to die. Hey guys, tonight we continue our journey not with kings or warriors, but with the survivors who stepped into a silent world washed clean by judgment. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of deep, forgotten history. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see how far this community reaches. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's descend together into Jasher's world. The Book of Jasher opens its early chapters with a world reborn, a world stripped of cities, stripped of giants, stripped of the noise of civilization. The earth after the flood is not presented as a peaceful paradise, but as a fractured land, scarred by the violence of the past. Rivers had shifted their paths, mountain ranges had broken open, coastlines had risen and sunk like breathing lungs beneath divine pressure. According to Jasher, Noah stepped out of the ark into a world that did not resemble the one he left behind. The text speaks almost poetically about Noah's grief. He wasn't a triumphant survivor, he was a witness to the end of an age. Jasher describes him walking the barren ground, dropping to his knees, and weeping for the world that had drowned. He wasn't weeping for himself, he was weeping for Adam's children, for everything humanity had destroyed through pride, through violence, through alliances with beings they were never meant to walk beside. Jasher gives remarkable detail about the early days after the ark came to rest. Noah built an altar, offering sacrifices not merely as thanksgiving, but as a plea, let this never happen again. And according to Jasher, the world responded. Animals began to emerge from hiding places, trees sprouted from torn soil, the earth moved with new life. Yet the survivors felt something else, an eerie stillness, a sense that they were walking through the graveyard of the ancient world. The sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, each carried different burdens. Shem walked with reverence, aware that he was inheriting the spiritual legacy of the old world. Ham walked with fear, sensing the shadows that lingered, the whispers of old sins that seemed to cling to the ruins beneath their feet. Japheth walked with curiosity, gazing across unfamiliar landscapes, wondering what lay beyond the horizon. Jasher says that the families of Noah spread out cautiously at first, moving along rivers and valleys that still bore fresh scars from the cataclysm. They built tents near mountains, afraid to settle too close to the oceans, those waters that had swallowed a civilization. But even in this new beginning, the seeds of future nations were already forming. The Book of Jasher describes how humanity quickly divided into distinct clans. Shem's descendants became keepers of memory, those who guarded the ancient traditions, the stories of Adam, Enoch, and the Watchers. Japheth's line spread wide, becoming explorers, navigators, and founders of distant tribes across the north. Ham's descendants, however, settled in lands rich and fertile, and from their line would rise kings, some great, some terrible. And this is where Jasher provides a detail that changes everything. According to the text, not all the echoes of the antediluvian world were gone. Some knowledge survived, knowledge humanity should never have possessed. Tools from before the flood were occasionally discovered in the mud, strange metals that did not rust, markings on stones that glowed faintly in moonlight, fragments of monuments half buried under layers of sediment. The survivors knew these belonged to the world of the Watchers, and Noah commanded them to bury or destroy each one. But not everyone obeyed. The descendants of Ham were fascinated by these relics. Jasher hints that some of them reawakened old practices, rituals whispered before the flood, remnants of forbidden arts taught by the fallen angels. This tiny seed of curiosity would eventually grow into a kingdom, a king, and a tower that challenged heaven. But that story belongs to a later chapter. For now, Jasher focuses on how the nations of the earth began. And unlike the simple genealogies of Genesis, Jasher tells it like an unfolding saga. The clans built small settlements, then villages, then fortified cities. They traded, argued, intermarried, and struggled to rediscover basic crafts, metallurgy, stone cutting, astronomy. The survivors had to reinvent civilization from scratch, and yet, their memories of the pre-flood world lingered like ghosts. Some families remembered the Watchers descending from the skies in blazing light. Some remembered seeing giants stride across valleys in a single step. Others remembered ancient technologies, machines, instruments, and strange lights that illuminated the homes of the Nephilim. These memories passed quietly from elders to children, sometimes as warnings, sometimes as temptations. Jasher makes it clear that humanity after the flood did not start as innocent blank pages. They carried trauma. They carried secrets. And they carried the burden of a world destroyed by divine judgment. One of the most striking early scenes in Jasher is the division of territory. Noah, knowing conflict would arise, divided the earth among his sons. He gave each family a portion, lands in the north, south, east, and west, and commanded them not to violate each other's borders. But as Jasher reveals, this command would be broken again and again. Because as populations grew, ambition grew with them. The sons of Ham, especially, looked at the fertile lands of Shem and Japheth with envy. This envy would eventually give rise to one of the most feared figures in ancient history. But before that happens, Jasher describes the earth settling into new rhythms. Crops were planted. Animals multiplied. Cities were built. And though peace existed for a time, a quiet tension hovered over the nations. Everyone remembered what had happened when mankind last grew powerful. Everyone remembered what the angels had taught. Everyone remembered how far humanity had fallen. Yet not all memories were dark. Jasher preserves stories of kindness, cooperation, the rebuilding of schools and meeting places, the return of music and poetry. Humanity, for a brief moment, seemed to be learning from its mistakes. But the world after the flood was a fragile world, and fragile worlds break easily. The text warns that certain individuals began seeking more than land or influence. They sought the hidden knowledge of the pre-flood age. They searched the ruins of drowned cities for relics. They studied strange carvings left by the Nephilim. Some even attempted to decipher fragments of antediluvian tablets. These seekers believed that the Watcher's power had not fully died with the flood. They believed it could be reclaimed. And they were right. Because Jasher reveals that among the grandchildren of Noah, one child was born unlike the others. A child whose strength, intelligence, and leadership were far beyond normal men. A child whose destiny would change the world forever. His name was Nimrod. And the rise of this mysterious king, the first mighty ruler after the flood, would ignite a chain of events leading to rebellion, empire, and the greatest technological project the ancient world had ever seen. But that is the story of our next chapter, a chapter in which history and mythology collide, a chapter in which Jasher reveals truths that Genesis only hints at. For now, the world after the flood stands quiet, recovering, rebuilding, unaware that a new age is about to begin. An age of kings, towers, wars, and shadows of the ancient world rising once more. Hey guys, tonight we continue not with a prophet or a wanderer, but with a child born into a recovering world, a child whose destiny would shake the nations after the flood. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy our journeys into ancient mysteries. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see this community rising across the world. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's unravel the beginning of a legend. According to the Book of Jasher, the world after the flood was still fragile, still forming its identity. Nations were growing like saplings in a forest cleared by fire. And into this new world, into this delicate balance of hope and fear, a child was born who would forever alter the path of humanity, Nimrod, the son of Cush, the grandson of Ham. Jasher describes his birth almost with a sense of foreboding. While most children of the new world were frail, vulnerable, unsure, Nimrod was born with strength. He grew taller, faster, and more resilient than other boys his age. His eyes gleamed with something like hunger, hunger for knowledge, hunger for power, hunger for destiny. Even as a child, he stood out. While Shem's descendants focused on rebuilding spirituality, and Japheth's line spread across distant lands, the house of Ham began to gather influence. Ham's descendants were bold, ambitious, driven by memories of the pre-flood world, memories they barely understood. And in Nimrod, all of this ambition concentrated like fire within a furnace. Jasher tells us that Nimrod was taught the traditions of his people, but he was not satisfied. He wanted more. He listened to the stories of the Watchers, of the fallen angels, of the giants who once ruled the valleys. He wandered through ruins, touching stones scorched by ancient fire. He searched the earth for forgotten relics, fragments of the world before the flood. And he learned from them. He learned how tools were shaped. He learned how cities were built. He learned how men could be led, and how they could be controlled. As he grew into a young man, Nimrod became known as a mighty hunter. But this phrase has been misunderstood for thousands of years. According to Jasher, Nimrod did not simply hunt animals, he hunted monsters. Creatures left from the chaos of the flood. Beasts born from twisted bloodlines, remnants of the terror that once haunted the old world. Nimrod killed them not only with bravery, but with intelligence. He built traps, forged weapons, organized men into groups of coordinated hunters. People admired him, feared him, followed him. And with followers came influence. Soon, villages called upon Nimrod for protection. Tribes asked him to lead their hunts. Cities invited him to settle disputes. And the more they depended on him, the more he realized that he could shape them. Through fear. Through awe. Through leadership. Jasher describes a pivotal moment, one often lost in translation. A moment when Nimrod received a mysterious garment. This garment, according to ancient tradition, was no ordinary cloak. It was believed to have belonged to Adam himself, passed through generations, carrying symbolic authority and perhaps even remnants of divine craftsmanship. Some say it was made not by human hands, but woven before the fall. Whether symbol or power, the moment Nimrod wore it, people believed he carried the blessing, or curse, of the ancient world. With this garment, Nimrod's reputation exploded. Men bowed before him. Women told their children stories of his strength. Entire clans sent offerings. Nimrod did not simply accept leadership, he demanded it. He used charisma and force, wisdom and fear. And slowly, the first empire after the flood began to form. Jasher states that Nimrod chose a region rich in soil and rivers, a place where ancient ruins still whispered of civilizations before the flood. He built his first stronghold there, a city that would become the foundation of his power. He named it Shinar. Others would come to call it Babylon. The text does not hide Nimrod's ambition. He wanted to rule, not just lead. He commanded builders to raise walls, towers, and halls. He trained armies. He positioned himself as both king and protector. And people accepted it. Why? Because Nimrod promised something the world had not seen since the giants. He promised order through strength. He promised protection through power. He filled the vacuum of fear with the certainty of his voice. But Jasher reveals something deeper, something Genesis never explains. Nimrod's rise was not merely political, it was spiritual. As he gained influence, he began to adopt practices reminiscent of the old world. Rituals. Symbols. Ideas that echoed the teachings of the Watchers. He revived forgotten rites, crafted new ones, and slowly turned his growing kingdom into a place where the ambitions of men could rival heaven itself. And this is where the story shifts from history to destiny. Jasher describes how Nimrod gathered elders, seers, and builders into a single council. He spoke of building a unified world. A world without borders, without rival nations, without divided tribes. A world where all languages, all families, all people would serve under one king, him. He believed the flood was a warning, yes, but not a warning against sin. A warning against weakness. He believed humanity could survive anything, floods, disasters, even divine judgment, if they stood together under one system. One structure. One tower. Because Nimrod came to believe that the heavens were not unreachable. They were simply unchallenged. Jasher paints him not as a reckless tyrant, but as a visionary, dangerous precisely because he was brilliant. He observed storms. He studied the stars. He measured shadows and horizons. He mapped the land. And he concluded that the sky could be reached, not metaphorically, but physically. That the realm of divine beings could be approached through engineering and unity. This was the spark, the idea, that would ignite one of the greatest rebellions in ancient history. But Nimrod did not act alone. He surrounded himself with men who admired him, feared him, and trusted his vision. He built alliances with chieftains from distant lands. He convinced tribes to abandon their ancestral gods and pledge themselves to a single power. And soon, the plain of Shinar became a gathering place for the greatest concentration of manpower the ancient world had ever seen. The ground trembled not from earthquakes, but from thousands of feet marching toward one destiny. Builders, masons, hunters, warriors, scribes, stonecutters, astronomers. They came from every direction. And together, they would build something the world had never seen. But before the tower could rise, Nimrod had to secure one more thing, his rule. Absolute rule. Jasher reveals that he began imposing laws, constructing prisons, punishing dissenters, and eliminating rivals. He reshaped Shinar into a kingdom of unified purpose. A kingdom not under God, but against God. Because Nimrod believed that the flood had destroyed the weak. and that the survivors were destined not to worship heaven, but to surpass it. He stood before his people and delivered the speech that would seal his fate. A declaration of rebellion. A declaration of defiance. A declaration that mankind would never again be dominated by divine will. And so began the idea that would define empires, destroy nations, and scar human history, the Tower of Babel. That is where we go next, into the heart of the greatest construction project of the ancient world, a tower that stretched beyond architecture, beyond politics, beyond myth, a tower that dared to rewrite the relationship between heaven and earth. Hey guys, tonight we continue not with a prophecy or a miracle, but with the most ambitious construction project in ancient history. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the deep dives we do here. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's amazing to see this community growing across continents. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step into the shadow of a tower that tried to rewrite the laws of heaven. After Nimrod united the tribes of the earth under his rule, the Book of Jasher tells us that the plain of Shinar became the center of a rising empire. Tens of thousands gathered around its young king, builders, masons, hunters, farmers, priests, each drawn by the promise of something greater than survival. Nimrod had given them purpose. He spoke of a world that would never again be vulnerable to judgment, never again divided, never again frightened by the unknown. And so, Jasher says, Nimrod revealed his vision, a tower, not merely tall, but divine, a structure that would touch the very gates of heaven. This wasn't a rebellion born from ignorance. It was a rebellion born from ambition, intelligence, and deeply buried resentment. Humanity remembered the flood, the skies opening, the waters rising, the world drowning. The survivors believed they had endured divine wrath once before, and now, under Nimrod's leadership, they planned to ensure it would never happen again. This is where Jasher differs from Genesis. Jasher gives detail. Vivid detail. It says that the people did not simply want to reach heaven, they wanted to challenge heaven. Some wanted a tower to ascend. Others wanted a platform to wage war. And others, and this is the unsettling part, believed they could place a god of their own choosing atop the tower, replacing the God who had judged the earth. What Nimrod proposed was nothing less than the resurrection of the pre-flood dream, a unified world under a single ruler, empowered by knowledge that was never supposed to survive. The echoes of the watchers lingered in every stone they placed, every brick they baked, every tool they forged. Some of the techniques they used, Jasher hints, came from relics of the old world, lost technologies rediscovered in ruins scattered across the land. The construction itself was an unimaginable effort. Jasher describes millions of bricks being molded from clay and baked in massive kilns. Entire forests were cut down to feed the furnaces. Rivers were redirected to supply water. The plain shook from the march of laborers. 300,000 men worked at a time, some gathering materials, others building, others transporting food and water. It was the greatest human workforce the world had ever seen. And Nimrod commanded it with godlike authority. Jasher says the tower reached heights that made the workers dizzy. Those who climbed to the top would sometimes fall to their deaths, but the people did not mourn them. Instead, they mourned the loss of bricks, because bricks, they believed, were more important than human life. A single brick took time, labor, heat, fuel, and organization. A man, in their eyes, was easily replaced. This detail, subtle but chilling, reveals Nimrod's true success. He had reshaped humanity's values. People had begun to worship the construction itself. The tower wasn't just a building, it was a religion. A promise. A future. And, for Nimrod, it was a throne. According to Jasher, the tower had 3 major sections. The lower level was for habitation, entire families lived within the colossal structure. The second level was for industry, workshops, kilns, quarries, and storehouses. The third level was for war. Jasher claims the topmost level was being prepared as a fortress, fitted with mechanisms, weapons, and possibly, according to some interpretations, devices meant to launch stones or projectiles into the heavens. This wasn't a temple. It was a challenge. And God saw it. Jasher's account of heaven's response is one of the most dramatic portrayals in ancient literature. It says that the tower reached a height where winds changed, where clouds brushed its sides, where the sun looked closer. The higher they built, the more confident the people became. Some claimed they could hear the whispers of distant realms. Others believed the top of the tower shimmered with a strange kind of energy. But these are interpretations. What matters is that something extraordinary was happening. Then, according to Jasher, a council was held in heaven. The divine beings observed Nimrod's empire with concern. Not because humanity was building a tall structure, but because humanity was returning to the sins of the pre-flood world, unity under rebellion, unity under occult knowledge, unity under a leader intoxicated with his own greatness. Jasher paints the scene with almost terrifying clarity. It says that God descended not in wrath, but in sorrow. For he saw that mankind was about to destroy itself again. And so he acted, not by sending another flood, but by striking at the one thing Nimrod needed most. Communication. At dawn, as workers lifted mud and straw to form bricks, they began to speak, and none understood each other. Brothers shouted to brothers, fathers to sons, leaders to workers, but their words were like noise, foreign and wild. Panic erupted. Confusion spread up the tower like wildfire. Orders became chaos. Arguments became violence. The unified machine of Nimrod's empire shattered in a single morning. Jasher describes the scene with haunting imagery. Men threw tools to the ground. Teams abandoned projects. Groups splintered into tribes, each speaking a different tongue. Fights broke out over misunderstandings. Leaders lost control. The great tower, towering into the sky, now trembled with the sound of confusion. But Nimrod refused to yield. He roared commands, but no one understood him. He stood on a balcony overlooking the chaos, watching his empire collapse in real time. His dream, his ambition, his rebellion, undone not by flood or fire, but by the power of language. Some tribes fled the plain of Shinar entirely. Others stayed and fought. Some continued building without understanding the purpose, others tried to destroy what they had created. According to Jasher, the top of the tower eventually cracked, shaken by infighting and neglect. Parts of it collapsed. The remainder stood like a broken monument, a scar on the landscape, a reminder of a dream that defied heaven. This is why the place was called Babel, not merely because of confusion, but because it became a symbol of humanity's attempt to reach beyond its limits, and the divine response that followed. But the story does not end there. Because Jasher says that Nimrod did not fall with the tower. In fact, he grew more powerful. He used the chaos to consolidate control over those who still followed him. He declared himself king over the fractured tribes, and from the ruins of Babel, he forged the first true empire in recorded history. And in the shadows of this new empire, something else began to stir, the remnants of the giant bloodlines, the whisper of old powers, and the rise of supernatural conflicts that Jasher describes in the chapters ahead. The tower may have fallen, but Nimrod's ambition had only just begun. And the world was about to face consequences far greater than the confusion of tongues. In our next chapter, we follow the rise of post-flood giants, the wars they waged, and the ancient bloodlines that refused to die. Hey guys, tonight we continue not with the ruins of Babel, but with something far more disturbing, the return of the giants after the flood. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these late-night journeys into forgotten history. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always incredible to see this community awake across the world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step into the shadows of an age the world was told to forget. The Book of Jasher reveals something that shocks most readers, something many never considered possible. Because after the flood, after the world was cleansed of the Nephilim, after the giants were destroyed by waters that drowned mountains, their bloodline somehow returned. Their presence returned. Their kingdoms returned. And according to Jasher, their terror returned. Genesis makes a small, almost whispered statement: there were giants on the earth in those days, and also after that. But Genesis never explains how. Jasher does. Jasher pulls the curtain back on a secret that not only changed ancient history, but shaped the rise of nations throughout the Middle East. It begins with Ham. According to Jasher, Ham's descendants were not content with the land Noah assigned them. They pushed boundaries, crossed borders, and traveled into territories rich with ancient ruins, ruins of pre-flood cities, ruins of giant settlements, ruins still echoing with forbidden knowledge. And in those broken places, they found something. Some say it was relics. Some say it was writings. Some say it was individuals, survivors. But Jasher gives a hint far more subtle and far more unsettling: certain women who boarded the ark may have carried traces of the old world in their blood. Not giants themselves, but carriers of a lineage that would later awaken in their descendants. And in the line of Ham, that bloodline ignited. Jasher describes how the sons of Ham grew taller, stronger, and more aggressive than the other clans. Not all of them, but enough to form tribes of warriors whose height surpassed ordinary men. These were not the titanic Nephilim of Enoch's age, but they were the first generation of post-flood giants. Their names would soon echo across the ancient world: the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Emim, the Anakim. These were new giants, smaller than the ancient ones, but still towering, still terrifying, still powerful beyond the strength of mortal men. Jasher begins naming the regions they claimed. They built fortified settlements in Canaan. They constructed massive walls from stone blocks ordinary humans could not lift. They carved symbols of the old world into mountainsides. They roamed the valleys as hunters and warlords. And as Nimrod's empire expanded, he discovered something extraordinary: these giants were not merely strong, they were useful. Nimrod, ever the strategist, formed alliances with tribes that feared him. But the giants did not fear him. And that fascinated him. Jasher recounts a moment where Nimrod sought out one of these tribes. The text describes a tense encounter: Nimrod and his warriors standing in a valley surrounded by enormous men whose shadows swallowed the sunlight. Most kings would have trembled. Nimrod did not. Instead, he offered them something no one else had: recognition. Authority. A place in his rising empire. Some giants agreed. Some refused. And those who refused became enemies. And so began one of the strangest chapters of ancient history, a world where human armies marched alongside giants, where battles were fought between tribes of enormous warriors, where echoes of the pre-flood world roared across the mountains of Canaan. Jasher describes their kingdoms in detail. The Rephaim established cities with names that would later haunt the Israelites. The Zuzim crafted weapons of metal so heavy that ordinary humans could not carry them. The Emim became feared for their brutality. And the Anakim, the tallest of the post-flood giants, became legends in their own time. And somewhere among them, according to some interpretations of Jasher, walked remnants of an older bloodline, individuals whose size approached the giants before the flood. Their existence is a mystery, the text hints but does not explicitly reveal. But their presence shaped the terror that followed. One of the most chilling details in Jasher is the description of the Emim, a giant tribe so fearsome that entire cities fled at the sound of their footsteps. They left deep impressions in the earth wherever they walked. They hunted animals not for food, but for sport. And when Nimrod's kingdom grew stronger, the Emim viewed him not as a king, but as a rival. This tension would eventually erupt into war. Jasher tells of a time when the giants began to raid human settlements. They took livestock, food, and sometimes people. Tribes prayed for protection. Nimrod, now a powerful ruler, sent armies into giant territory, not to destroy them, but to control them. He wanted domination, not annihilation. He believed that with giants on his side, he could conquer the world. And for a time, he succeeded. But giants were not easily controlled. Their pride matched their strength. Their blood burned with the remnants of an age that defied heaven. And soon, certain tribes broke away from Nimrod's influence. They formed alliances of their own. They challenged Nimrod's soldiers. They battled among themselves. The land trembled under their conflicts. Jasher gives an extraordinary account of a battle in which Nimrod's forces clashed with a coalition of giants. The giants, armed with boulders and metal clubs, shattered entire battalions. Nimrod's archers fired volleys of arrows, which bounced harmlessly off the giants' thick skin and armor. This was not a war of humans, it was a war of worlds. The text describes one giant in particular, a leader of the Rephaim whose strength exceeded all others. His name is lost in translation, but Jasher says he wielded a weapon so massive that 10 men together could not lift it. He towered above Nimrod's soldiers like a mountain of flesh and iron. And in that moment, Nimrod, for the first time, realized he may have unleashed a force he could not control. But the giants were not invincible. Jasher reveals that internal conflict eventually weakened them. The tribes fought among themselves, Rephaim against Zuzim, Anakim against Emim, each claiming supremacy. They battled for territory, resources, prestige. And as their wars escalated, the surrounding human nations suffered. Villages were crushed under their footsteps. Fields were destroyed. Rivers were polluted with blood. The land groaned under the weight of their violence. And then, something unexpected happened. Human kings began to fight back. Jasher details how certain leaders, empowered by divine favor, challenged the giants. Some used strategy. Some used traps. Some claimed to have received guidance from heavenly messengers. And slowly, the balance began to shift. One of the greatest stories appears in the next chapters, the rise of Abraham and his early encounters with giant clans. But before Abraham appears, the stage must be set. Because Jasher makes something very clear. The world after the flood was not empty of giants. It was ruled by them. Feared by them. Shaped by them, ***. And humanity, guided by kings, prophets, and divine destiny, was about to fight for its future. The wars of the giants had begun. And the age of Abraham, the age of confrontation, was about to rise. Hey guys, tonight we continue not with kings or giants, but with the judgment that reset the entire world, the event Jasher describes with brutal honesty and terrifying clarity, the flood. Before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these deep, late-night explorations into forbidden history. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. This community feels like a global campfire at night, and I love seeing who joins us. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's descend together into the oldest catastrophe written by human hands. The Book of Jasher does not soften the story of the flood. It does not treat it as a children's lesson with rainbows, animals, and calm waves. Jasher opens the door to the raw horror of what led to it, and reveals a truth that many overlook: the flood was not just a punishment for sin, it was a targeted eradication. A divine genocide against a corrupted species that threatened the survival of humanity itself. Genesis gives only fragments. Enoch gives visions. But Jasher gives the world that existed in those final generations before the water rose. And what it describes is not simply wickedness, but contamination. A world overtaken, altered, twisted by the presence of the giants and the teachings of the fallen angels. Jasher says the earth was filled with violence, but the Hebrew word, Hamas, means more than brutality. It means corruption of flesh, corruption of nature, corruption of what life was meant to be. Humanity was merging species, crossing boundaries, manipulating creation. Men fashioned creatures through forbidden knowledge. Women practiced rituals designed to call spiritual beings into physical form. Some tribes even sacrificed infants to giants, believing the giants' favor would grant them power. The world was not morally declining, it was biologically dying. And so, Jasher tells us, God looked upon the earth and saw that if something was not done, humanity itself, the image-bearers, the last echo of Eden, would vanish. They were on the brink of genetic extinction. The flood was not only judgment. It was surgery. A cleansing of a world infected with something that could not be allowed to survive. Jasher describes how the giants grew in number, consuming resources until entire regions starved. They devoured animals, then crops, then people. They crushed villages under their feet. They demanded worship. They performed unspeakable acts. The fallen angels had long been bound, imprisoned for their rebellion, but their sons, the Nephilim, were still free. And then, as if sensing their impending destruction, the giants began having dreams. Terrifying visions of trees being uprooted, mountains collapsing, giants falling one by one, and a single man, Noah, surviving. These dreams frightened them. They sought interpretations. They begged the remaining wise men, those still loyal to heaven, to explain the visions. But no explanation brought comfort. One giant threw himself on the ground and cried out that heaven had decreed their end. Another swore he saw the sky split open and waters descend in torrents. Another claimed he saw the ark itself in a dream. And that is when the giants began to rage. Jasher says they tried everything to stop the prophecy. They threatened Noah. They attempted to sabotage the construction of the Arkansas. Some even tried to break into the mountains where Noah stored supplies. Others attempted to climb the hills and scream curses into the heavens. But nothing stopped the approaching judgment. The text says that as Noah and his sons worked, they were mocked, attacked, and hunted. The giants called Noah a fool. They laughed at the idea of rain. They called themselves the rightful rulers of earth, too mighty to drown, too powerful to fall. They believed themselves unstoppable. They believed themselves immortal. But they were wrong. When the first raindrops fell, Jasher says they barely noticed. When the water began rising, they panicked. When rivers burst their banks, the giants roared in fear. They climbed hills. They climbed mountains. They clung to cliffs. Some tried to tear into the ark itself. But the floodwaters rose faster than anything living could escape. And here is the detail Jasher adds that changes everything: the giants did not die quickly. Their strength kept them alive far longer than humans. They fought the waters. They clawed at the land. They climbed higher and higher. Some attempted to swim through the deluge. Others tried to stand on each other's shoulders. Jasher describes how they screamed curses at the heavens, demanding deliverance. But the sky did not answer. Then, one by one, the giants drowned. Their voices fell silent. The corrupted species born from heaven and earth was erased from existence. And the world fell quiet. The flood was not peaceful. The flood was not merciful. It was a reset, a violent one, designed to wipe out a hybrid race that threatened the balance of creation. The waters rose over mountains, swallowing cities of stone and metal, swallowing monuments that still lie buried beneath oceans today. The flood was a cosmic reset button, a divine intervention to protect humanity from extinction. Jasher describes Noah inside the ark, not celebrating survival, but crying. Crying for the world he once knew. Crying for the lives lost. Crying for a civilization that destroyed itself through arrogance and forbidden knowledge. He did not rejoice, he mourned. Because he understood the price of salvation, that everything he once loved was gone. But the floodwaters did not only wash away the giants, they washed away the knowledge they brought. Or at least, most of it. Because in the generations after the flood, fragments returned. Bloodlines reawakened. Forbidden knowledge resurfaced. Giants rose again, not as tall, not as powerful, but dangerous enough to shape nations, wage wars, and haunt the land. The flood failed to permanently erase what the Watchers began. And Jasher makes that fact painfully clear. As the waters receded, as the ark came to rest on the mountains, as humanity stepped into a new dawn, the seeds of the old world still remained. Seeds that would later rise in Canaan. Seeds that would challenge Nimrod, Abraham, the sons of Jacob. Seeds that would reshape the destiny of Israel. The flood was not the end of the story. It was the end of the beginning. And in our next chapter, we turn to the man who would rise in this world of giants, kings, and supernatural conflict, the man destined to confront the shadows of both worlds. Abraham. Hey guys, tonight we continue not with a flood or a fallen empire, but with a man whose destiny shaped all future nations, Abraham. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these deep late-night explorations. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. This community feels like a hidden tribe gathering across time zones. Now, dim the lights, and let's step into one of the most dramatic chapters in the Book of Jasher. After the flood, after Nimrod's empire rose from the ruins of Babel, the world entered a new age, an age of kings. But kings alone did not shape this era. According to Jasher, something else was rising, the awakening of destiny in the line of Shem, the line chosen to carry the knowledge of heaven. And from that line came Abram, not yet Abraham, not yet the father of nations, but a child marked from birth by supernatural conflict. Jasher describes Abram's birth in terms far more dramatic than Genesis. On the night he was born, strange signs filled the sky. Stars shifted. A light descended. Nimrod's astrologers ran to his palace in terror. They told the king that a child had been born who would swallow the kingdoms of the earth, and break the crown of Nimrod. The prophecy terrified him. Nimrod's fear turned to rage. He ordered the child killed. This is where Jasher becomes cinematic. According to the text, Abram's father, Terah, aware of the danger, hid the child in a cave. And for 10 years, Abram lived in that cave, nourished by secret care, protected from Nimrod's assassins. Jasher paints the image of a boy who grew not in luxury, but in silence, with only the whisper of the divine watching over him. By the time Abram emerged from hiding, the world had changed again. The giants had spread. Nimrod's empire had grown. Wars raged across territories. Kingdoms clashed for dominance. But Abram, guided by a wisdom beyond his years, rejected the idols of his father's house and the gods of Nimrod's empire. He sought a God he had never seen, the one his ancestors once knew. Jasher describes how Abram confronted the idol worship of his father's household. He smashed the idols, one by one, and left the largest idol holding a club. When Terah asked him what happened, Abram answered, "The large idol fought the others and destroyed them." His father shouted that idols have no power. Abram replied, then why do you worship them? This moment marks the true beginning of Abram's war, not against armies, but against false gods. But this rebellion reached Nimrod's ears. And Nimrod, furious that the boy he once tried to kill had survived, arrested Abram and threw him into a massive furnace, a furnace so hot that soldiers who approached it were burned alive. But Abram walked out unharmed. Jasher stresses that this miracle terrified the empire. People whispered that Abram was protected by the God of heaven. And Nimrod, shaken but still proud, expelled Abram instead of killing him again. He hoped exile would remove the threat. But exile became destiny. Abram traveled through Canaan, Egypt, and the lands of the giants. He witnessed tribes of Rephaim and Anakim. He saw fortified cities built with stones the size of towers. He saw the brutality of giant kings who ruled by sheer terror. And he saw something else, the beginning of a conflict that would pull him into the greatest war of the ancient world. The War of the Kings. Genesis gives only a summary: 4 kings against 5, Lot taken captive, Abram pursuing them. But Jasher reveals the true scale. This was not a small conflict. This was a global war, a war involving giants, supernatural forces, ancient empires, and armies numbering in the tens of thousands. The kings who formed the Eastern Alliance, Amraphel, Arioch, Kedorlaomer, and Tidal, were not ordinary rulers. According to Jasher, some commanded giants. Some wielded weapons crafted from pre-flood metals. Some performed rituals taught in the age of the Watchers. Their armies marched with monstrous beasts and war machines built from forgotten technologies. When these kings invaded Canaan, they crushed the western tribes with overwhelming force. They burned cities. They toppled walls. They enslaved entire populations. And among the captives was Abram's nephew, Lot. This was the moment everything changed. Abram, hearing of Lot's capture, prepared for war, but not with an army. Jasher says Abram gathered only 318 trained servants. Against tens of thousands. Against giants. Against kings empowered by ancient knowledge. It should have been suicide. But Abram had something the other kings did not: divine backing. Jasher says that on the night of the attack, Abram prayed. And as he prayed, a supernatural light surrounded him. Some say it was an angel. Some say it was a heavenly fire. Some say it was the same presence that protected him from Nimrod's furnace. Whatever it was, it moved with him into the battlefield. Jasher describes the night attack in astonishing detail. Abram divided his small army into groups. He struck the king's camp from multiple angles. Confusion spread like wildfire. The giants panicked under the sudden assault. The armies, believing they were surrounded by heavenly hosts, broke ranks. Some fled. Others fought shadows that were not there. Jasher records that giant soldiers cried out in terror, believing divine wrath had descended on them. Abram himself cut through the battlefield like a storm. Not with superhuman strength, but with unwavering faith and strategic brilliance. He used the chaos, the darkness, and the terrain to his advantage. And by dawn, the unimaginable had happened. The 4 kings were defeated. Their armies shattered. Their giants slain or scattered. And Lot was rescued. The world was stunned. A man with 318 servants defeated a coalition of empires and giant tribes. Nimrod, hearing the news, trembled. He realized the prophecy was unfolding as predicted, that Abram was indeed the man destined to challenge his legacy. And the surviving nations began whispering that Abram's God was not like the gods of the giants or the idols of the kings. This moment was a turning point. The War of the Kings proved that heaven was intervening in human history again, and that Abram was its chosen instrument. Giants fell before him. Empires bowed to him. And Nimrod began to fear him more than ever. But Jasher also reveals something Genesis does not, that Abram's victory triggered a new wave of giant activity. The tribes, angered by the fall of their allies, began preparing for war. They saw Abram as a threat to their dominance. And among them rose one of the last preeminent giant kings, a figure whose presence would haunt the next generation. As the smoke of battle faded, Abram stood on a battlefield littered with broken weapons, shattered armor, and fallen giants. And in that moment, in the quiet after victory, a mysterious figure approached him, Melchizedek. Jasher reveals that this priest-king recognized Abram's divine mission long before Abram understood it himself. Their meeting marked the beginning of a new covenant, one that would shape the destiny of nations and set the stage for the fall of giant kingdoms across Canaan. In our next chapter, we enter the war against Sodom, the corruption of the cities of the plain, and the return of the sins of the watchers. Hey guys, tonight we close our journey not with kings or giants, but with a city whose destruction has echoed across thousands of years, Sodom. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these deep, late-night explorations into forbidden ancient history. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how this community shines across continents. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's descend into the darkest chapter of the Book of Jasher. According to Jasher, the destruction of Sodom was not a simple punishment for wickedness. It was not merely moral decay, not merely societal corruption. Jasher reveals something Genesis hints at, something older, something supernatural, something rooted in the sins of the watchers. The downfall of Sodom was the return of a pre-flood evil. The giants had been scattered across the earth by Abraham's victory. Nimrod's empire was shaken. The world was shifting. But in the plains of Jordan, in 5 wealthy cities glittering in the sun, a deeper corruption was taking root. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela were rich, powerful, and decadent. They had fertile lands, advanced trade routes, strong armies, and influence unmatched by surrounding nations. But Jasher makes this clear. Their prosperity was built on cruelty. The Book of Jasher opens the curtain on Sodom's true nature, a city that institutionalized evil. Judges were chosen not for wisdom, but for pleasure. Strangers were stripped, tortured, humiliated. Orphans were denied food. The strong preyed upon the weak. And slowly, immorality turned into ritual, and ritual turned into abomination. Jasher reveals a chilling detail: the people of Sodom built devices, torturous machines, designed to mock the laws of heaven. They forced travelers onto stone beds. If the traveler was too short, they stretched him; if too tall, they cut his limbs. They created laws that protected cruelty, punished kindness, and celebrated perversion of every kind. But the darkest secret is this: Sodom was repeating the sins of the watchers. Just as the fallen angels descended on Mount Hermon before the flood, taking women, corrupting flesh, and creating monstrous offspring, Sodom welcomed these ancient sins with open arms. They revived occult rituals. They called on spirits. They invoked ancient names. They sought supernatural pleasure and power. The same forbidden knowledge that ruined the pre-flood world had returned, stronger, bolder, more defiant. And heaven watched. While Abraham lived in nearby Hebron, he could see the smoke of their sacrifices rising in the distance. He heard rumors of their cruelty. He listened to survivors trembling as they told stories of what they had seen in the city. He prayed that the people would repent. But they did not. Jasher describes a moment when 3 travelers, strangers in simple garments, approached the city gates. They were angels, walking among men. But Sodom did not know. Instead of hospitality, they received mockery. Instead of rest, they were targeted. Lot, Abraham's nephew, saw them and rushed to protect them. He begged them to stay in his house, knowing what the city would do to outsiders. The angels agreed. And that night, the city revealed its true nature. A mob gathered at Lot's door. Thousands. Shouting. Demanding the strangers. Jasher says the crowd was so large that the entire street trembled under their feet. The angels looked out the window, and their decision was made. The judgment that erased the cities of the plain was not simply punishment. It was quarantine. It was containment. It was the same divine strategy that once removed the giants, the cleansing of a spiritual infection that threatened to spread. Jasher describes what followed with frightening clarity. As dawn approached, the angels struck the mob with blindness. Panic erupted. Men clawed at walls, screaming. Women ran through streets in confusion. Hundreds fell over each other. Chaos spread like fire. And while the city collapsed into madness, the angels pulled Lot from his home. "Hurry," they said. "For we can do nothing until you are gone." Lot fled with his family, urged again and again to keep moving, to not look back, to escape the coming destruction. But Jasher describes the sorrow of Lot's wife, her heart bound to the life she was leaving. She turned. She looked. And she became a pillar of salt, frozen in the moment of her disobedience, a monument of what happens when the heart remains where judgment is falling. Then, it happened. Jasher says the skies above Sodom split open. Flames descended like rivers. The earth shook. Sulfur rained in sheets. The buildings ignited instantly. The towers collapsed. The ground opened. The cities burned so intensely that their smoke rose, like a furnace reaching heaven. Entire armies were vaporized. Fields turned to ash. Rivers boiled. The 5 cities were wiped from existence in minutes. But Jasher gives another detail, one Genesis does not. As the cities burned, Abraham watched from a distance. And beside him, a figure stood, some say an angel, some say the Lord himself. Together, they watched the destruction not with joy, but with grief. Abraham saw the judgment unfold and trembled. He knew this was not simply punishment. This was an act of cosmic preservation, a second flood by fire. The sins of Sodom were not new. They were ancient. They were the sins of the watchers, resurrected in a new generation. And the destruction of Sodom was the final warning that heaven would never again allow those ancient abominations to take root. But Jasher reveals one more chilling truth. The influence of the giants had not ended. The rebellion of Nimrod had not ended. The threat of corrupted bloodlines had not ended. Because the destruction of Sodom did not purify the entire region. In the mountains to the east, in the lands of Seir, in the desert strongholds of Edom, the remnants of the giants still lived. And among them rose a warrior whose presence would alter the destiny of 2 brothers. Esau, the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham, would clash with giant kings in battles that would shake the hills of Canaan. He would slay Nimrod. He would end the final bloodline of post-flood giant royalty. And his actions would trigger a new rivalry, Esau against Jacob, a rivalry that would shape the future tribes of Israel. But that belongs to our final chapter. For now, the ashes of Sodom still rise. The sky is dark. The earth is silent. And the book of Jasher stands open, revealing that what fell upon Sodom was not merely wrath, it was a divine operation to prevent the sins of the watchers from engulfing the world once more. The giants may have fallen. The cities may have burned. But their shadow would continue for generations. Until the last giant hunter rose. Hey guys, tonight we continue not with Sodom's ashes or Nimrod's tower, but with the 2 brothers whose rivalry would ignite a chain of events that shaped nations, Jacob and Esau. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these deep late-night journeys into forgotten scriptures. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is. This community feels like a global circle gathered around one fire. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's enter one of the most intense chapters in the Book of Jasher. After the destruction of Sodom, the world entered a strange calm. The giant kingdoms were weakened. Nimrod's empire was shaking. Angels had walked openly among men. And in the hills of Canaan, Abraham watched the dust settle over a world that had just survived another supernatural cleansing. But destiny was not finished. Because Abraham's son Isaac would have 2 children, children whose lives would reignite the ancient conflict between the bloodlines of heaven and the remnants of the pre-flood world. Jasher describes the birth of Jacob and Esau with great detail. Esau emerged first, red-haired, strong, wild. Jacob followed, holding his brother's heel as if refusing to be left behind. Even as infants, Jasher says, their personalities were clear. Esau was a hunter, fearless, powerful, driven by instinct. Jacob was thoughtful, calm, strategic, drawn to spiritual matters rather than physical strength. But what Jasher reveals next is rarely taught. Esau grew into one of the greatest giant slayers in ancient history. Not David. Not Joshua. Esau. From his youth, Esau roamed the mountains fighting beasts that others feared. Wolves, lions, bears, and later, creatures left over from the era of the giants. His strength was unnatural. His speed unmatched. His instincts razor-sharp. And this would eventually pull him into a battle with one of the most powerful rulers still alive. Nimrod himself. Because Nimrod did not die in the destruction of Sodom. He survived. His empire survived. His influence survived. And according to Jasher, his hatred for Abraham's family survived. Nimrod grew older, but his ambition did not fade. He rebuilt parts of his kingdom. He expanded into new lands. He manipulated tribes. And wherever he went, giant clans followed him, remnants of the Anakim, Rephaim, and Emim who still roamed the land. But in the days of Jacob and Esau, something changed. Nimrod began searching for a successor, someone who could inherit his strength and continue his rebellion against heaven. But prophecy loomed over him. The prophecy spoken on the night of Abram's birth, that one from Abraham's line would one day destroy him. And that prophecy was about to unfold. Jasher describes a dramatic moment. Esau, hungry after hunting, wandered near one of Nimrod's royal territories. He overheard Nimrod speaking to his warriors, boasting of his power, promising to reclaim dominion over the world. Esau, fearless and impulsive, confronted them. A battle erupted. Esau fought like a storm. Nimrod's warriors, trained, armed, and some even giant descended, fell beneath his arrows and sword. The ground shook under the clash. Nimrod himself stepped forward, wielding a massive weapon forged from pre-flood metals. The two collided in combat that Jasher describes as almost mythic. Esau struck Nimrod down. At that moment, the ancient prophecy was fulfilled. The last truly dominant giant-affiliated king fell by the hand of a descendant of Abraham. But this victory came with a price. Esau had to flee. Nimrod's armies hunted him. For days he ran through deserts and mountains, hiding in caves, surviving on whatever he could find. When he finally reached home, exhausted and starving, he stumbled into Jacob's tent, and asked for food. Jacob offered the stew. Esau accepted. And in his desperation, he swore away his birthright. The birthright exchange was not just about hunger. It was the aftermath of a war. A war between Esau and the last giant king. But the rivalry between Jacob and Esau went far beyond stew. Jasher says the brothers clashed constantly. Esau trusted strength and instinct, Jacob trusted destiny and wisdom. Isaac favored Esau. Rebekah favored Jacob. And heaven favored Jacob. As the years passed, Esau grew more entwined with the giant-affiliated tribes. He hunted with them, fought with them, lived among them. He respected their strength and they respected his. Jasher says that some giant clans even considered Esau one of them, not in blood, but in spirit. Jacob, meanwhile, grew into a man of vision. His encounters with angels, his dreams of ladders reaching to heaven, his calm and strategic nature, all marked him for spiritual leadership. The conflict between the brothers grew, shaping their destinies. Eventually, when Jacob received Isaac's blessing through Rebekah's plan, Esau's rage was unstoppable. He swore to kill Jacob. And Jacob fled into the lands of his uncle Laban, not to escape forever, but to grow into the man who would become Israel. But Esau's story did not end there. In fact, Jasher devotes entire passages to Esau's later battles. Esau became a king among the sons of Seir, a tribal region known for its brutal warriors, many of whom carried remnants of giant blood. He ruled with strength. He led armies. And he fought the last pockets of giant clans that still haunted the land. Jasher describes one final age of giant warfare, a post-Sodom purge where human tribes, newly empowered by divine favor, clashed with the last surviving Titan-blooded rulers. Esau led many of these battles. He hunted down giant leaders hiding in caves. He battled enormous warriors who challenged his throne. He fought entire clans of Emim and Anakim who refused to bow to human kings. And all the while, Jacob grew into a patriarch, a man destined to father the 12 tribes of Israel. Their paths diverged, but their destinies intertwined. Because the final remnants of the giant bloodlines would fall at the hands of Esau's descendants, and, later, at the hands of Jacob's descendants, including Joshua and David. The rivalry between the brothers became the foundation for the rivalry between nations, Edom and Israel, each representing different legacies of the ancient world. By the end of chapter 9, the Book of Jasher paints a world where Nimrod is dead. The last giant kings are falling. Esau becomes the ultimate hunter-warrior. Jacob becomes the spiritual heir of heaven. And the ancient forces of the pre-flood world are fading. But one chapter remains. A chapter of prophecy. A chapter that reveals what Jasher says about the distant future, about angels, kingdoms, giants, and the destiny of nations. In our final chapter, we turn to the closing prophecies of Jasher, and the warnings it gives for the ages yet to come. Hey guys, tonight we conclude our journey not with a battle or a king, but with the prophecies that close the Book of Jasher, warnings whispered across thousands of years. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these deep, late-night explorations into ancient mysteries. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is. It's always beautiful seeing this community awake across the world. Now, dim the lights one last time, and let's walk together into the final pages of a book the world tried to erase. The Book of Jasher does not end like other ancient texts. It does not fade into genealogies, or summaries, or quiet prayers. It ends with prophecy, heavy, unsettling, powerful prophecy. Prophecy that links the past to the future, prophecy that explains why the book may have been hidden, prophecy that speaks of giants, angels, kingdoms, and the destiny of nations long after Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau took their final breaths. Jasher begins its last arc with the final days of Jacob. Old, blind, near death, but still carrying a spiritual insight unmatched in his generation. Jasher says Jacob gathered his sons, the 12 tribes, and told them not only their future, but the future of the world. He spoke of wars that would shake continents. He spoke of generations rising and falling like waves. He spoke of kingdoms that would rise from the dust of Nimrod's empire. He spoke of a time when the remnant of the giant bloodlines would try once more to rise, only to fall under the descendants of Israel. The Book of Jasher emphasizes something few realize. The war between divine and corrupted bloodlines would continue across ages. Not through physical giants alone, but through ideology, through rebellion, through the spiritual forces that guided nations. Jasher recounts Jacob's blessing over Judah, that from him would come kings, warriors, and ultimately one whose rule would never end. He spoke not only of David, but of something far beyond David. A leader, a Messiah, who would break the chains of ancient rebellions and reclaim the earth from the spiritual powers that defied heaven. Then Jacob turned to Joseph, and Jasher records his words in expanded form. Jacob spoke of Joseph's descendants becoming like a vine stretching over walls, spreading across nations, welcoming exiles, defending the oppressed. Joseph's line, he said, would clash with powers far greater than earthly kingdoms, powers rooted in the ancient sins of the Watchers. When Jacob died, Jasher says the morning shook the land. Even kings trembled. Even tribes of giants in distant regions paused to acknowledge the passing of a patriarch whose spiritual presence was felt by friend and foe alike. But the story does not end there. Because prophecy continued through Joseph. Jasher's final chapters describe Joseph's uncanny visions, dreams of future famines, future wars, future empires that would rise like iron beasts across the earth. He warned Egypt of invasions. He predicted the rise of nations whose cruelty would surpass Nimrod's. He foresaw the suffering of Israel under foreign rule, and the miraculous deliverance that would follow. He even spoke of a leader who would one day rise in Egypt, not a pharaoh, but a prophet, who would part waters, crush idols, and bring down a kingdom. Moses. Long before Moses was born, Joseph described him in detail. But Jasher's prophecies extend far beyond Moses. Jasher describes a cycle, a cosmic rhythm, of rebellion and restoration. It says that every time humanity draws close to the forbidden knowledge of the pre-flood world, judgment follows. Not always through floods or fire, sometimes through the fall of empires, the collapse of cities, or the rise of unexpected leaders. The book warns that the spiritual forces behind the giants, the same rebellious watchers who defied heaven before the flood, would continue to influence human kingdoms. They would whisper to tyrants. They would empower corrupt rulers. They would inspire nations to imitate the sins of the ancient world. But Jasher also promises something else. They will never fully succeed. Because every time those forces rise, a chosen remnant rises against them. In the days of the giants, it was Noah. In the days of Nimrod, it was Abraham. In the days of the last giant kings, it was Esau and Jacob's descendants. In the days of Egypt, it would be Moses. In the days of Canaan, it would be Joshua. In the days of Goliath, it would be David. And in the days to come, the pattern will repeat. Jasher gives one final, haunting warning. A generation will come that will seek the knowledge of the Watchers, and in that day wickedness shall multiply again. A generation that will crave forbidden knowledge. A generation that will resurrect ancient mysteries. A generation that will ignore the lessons of Babel, the giants, and Sodom. But Jasher gives hope. It says that the final restoration will not come through human strength alone. It will come through heaven's intervention, just as it did in the days of Abraham, Moses, and David. The war between divine order and ancient rebellion will end not with a tower, nor a flood, nor a fire, but with a final act of revelation. Everything Jasher describes, the giants, the watchers, the kings, the wars, is part of a larger story, a cosmic struggle that spans ages. Jasher's final chapter does not close the book, it opens a doorway. It says, "Those who understand the past will recognize the signs when they return. And perhaps that is why the Book of Jasher disappeared for centuries. Perhaps its warnings were too clear. Perhaps its patterns too recognizable. Perhaps its message too dangerous for empires built on the same foundations as Nimrod's kingdom. Tonight, as we close this forgotten scripture, remember one thing. Nothing in ancient history vanishes without reason. Books are not erased for being irrelevant. Books are erased for being true. The Book of Jasher survives as a whisper of the world before the flood, and the world after, a reminder that the battles fought by giants and patriarchs still echo in the spiritual wars of today. And for those who read its prophecies carefully, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The ancient patterns are returning.